And we are back for the Thousand Worlds Book Club, and we are talking about Bitterblooms. I am joined by the Lord of the Vale, Sweetrobin. Hello everyone, it's a pleasure. If you haven't read Bitterblooms, I have the link for both the written and the audio below. It's about 17 pages or a little over an hour to listen to, and it's a story set in a world similar to Westeros. It's a planet with a medieval level of technology and irregular seasons. The protagonist comes from Harrenhal, and the titular Bitterblooms are reminiscent of winter roses. So if you haven't read it, pause, go do that, and come back. Now, Sweetrobin, you have read all of A Song of Ice and Fire and The Thousand Worlds? Well, my eyes are very weak, but Elaine has read them all to me. Well, that's good. So our last two stories were about the double war between humanity and the Harangans in The Hero, and humanity and the Findi in Men of Greywater Station. Now, after this 1,000-year conflict, there's a human civil war and the human empire collapses. Most human worlds go into a period of technological regression and lose spaceflight. And this period is called the Interregnum. Now, some worlds never regain spaceflight, and Bitterblooms seems to take place on one of these such worlds. The story mentions the voyages of Claranamas and Tomo and Walberg, so much of the galaxy has regained spaceflight. The world of Bitterblooms, however, has been forgotten and left behind. So the world of Bitterblooms has fallen back to a medieval level of technology, and the planet is also one with irregular seasons. And when I say irregular, I mean they aren't 3-month seasons. These are seasons that last years. However, they seem to be stable lengths of time, unlike Westeros. Bitterblooms begins in the 8th year of Deep Winter. Our story opens with our protagonist Shawn in the wilderness trying to bury her father/lover/mentor. But alas, the ground is too hard. Shawn's father-lover had been mauled by a vampire. Vampires seem to be a weird nocturnal bat creature that runs on top of the snow. Shawn is trying to get home to Harrenhal, but is caught up in the cold and slowed down by her dying father-lover, and now Shawn doesn't have much chance of surviving. The vampires are closing in when a light and a high-pitched noise scare them off. Shawn follows the noise and finds a strange metal building surrounded by blue flowers. She's attacked by a vampire but awakens safe and sound inside the metal building where she meets Morgan. Morgan claims to be a magician and tells Shawn that the metal building is a spaceship. This ship can also produce food, and the walls can be TV screens, creating any environment. Morgan simulates a gathering on the screens, which seems to be a cross-tribe orgy to introduce new genes into heavily inbred tribes. Shawn falls for it and enters into a sexual relationship with Morgan. Morgan seems to know Shawn's ancestors and knew a different Shawn. Apparently, these previous Harrenhal residents knew Morgan, left her, and then invented a legend about how dangerous she was in order to keep later generations away. These ancestors seem to have feared the softening effect of Morgan's luxury, as the world they live in seems to be a tough place that requires tough people. Morgan tells Shawn that they're traveling the galaxy and seeing new places, but after seeing melted snow on Morgan's boot, she realizes she hasn't left the Bitterblooms world at all. Furious at Morgan, Shawn leaves and heads home to Harrenhal. She lives a good life, but it being a tough society, when she grows old, she's put out to die. And so Shawn returns to Morganhall to find Morgan. She discovers that Morgan wasn't even the woman's name, it was the name of her ship. Our story ends with Shawn freezing in the snow. We're unsure if Morgan ends up rescuing her or not. Now, Sweetrobin, what do you think about the fact that seasons can last for years in this story, just like in Westeros? It's very interesting. It's hard not to think that George R.R. Martin borrowed the idea from himself. Well, I also think it's fascinating as it kind of proves that our author is very deceptive in interviews. Deceptive? What do you mean? Well, it's just that there's this infamous Entertainment Weekly interview where they ask our author about seasons. He then says, "I have people constantly writing me with science fiction theories about the seasons. It's a double star system with a black dwarf, and that would explain..." It's fantasy, man. It's magic. He tries to make it sound like fans are overthinking things and looking for a scientific explanation. And he's done this when he himself already wrote a story about irregular seasons where he describes how it's scientifically done. In Bitterblooms, it happens to be a double star system. And planetary orbits are a part of his other stories like Dying of the Light and the Plague Star. The point being, long ago he had already thought up a scientific reason for irregular seasons. Why on earth would he remove the scientific explanation for a magical one? Sweetrobin, you okay? George R.R. Martin is a liar. He's a bad man. I want to see him fly. It's okay, Sweetrobin, it's okay. You gotta remember that our author is trying to protect his secrets. In the interview, he doesn't deny that there's a scientific explanation. He just says that it's magic, and magic is nothing more than unexplained science. He was just being tricky. That seems pretty jerky to me. Now, Sweetrobin, what do you think about the fact that Morgan is named after a ship called Morgan Le Fay from Avalon? Oh, right. Elaine read me a story about King Arthur. Although there are different versions of the story, Morgan is the sister, enemy, and sometimes lover of King Arthur. So once again, incest rears its ugly head, here in King Arthur, in Bitterblooms, and in Ice and Fire. Ew, incest is gross. Aren't you in love with your cousin? No, I'm in love with Elaine. Morgan Le Fay is also a character that's been largely reinterpreted by the modern world. Her villainization is now linked to the fact that she was a strong sexual woman in opposition to the submissive, chaste, damsel in distress archetype. Our author is of course a big feminist and was influenced by his brief love affair and lifetime friendship with Lisa Tuttle. Lisa Tully? No, Lisa Tuttle. It is interesting that Bitterblooms is the interaction between a strong sexualized female character and a strong masculinized female character. It's kind of like a meeting of Cersei and Brienne. Oh, I just realized at the beginning of the story, Shawn is literally trying to bury patriarchy. And she both literally and figuratively can't do it, just like no one can literally or figuratively bury Ned Stark. The ghosts of dead ancestors haunt our characters. So, Sweetrobin, there's a lot of aspects of this story that are similar to Westeros. It's almost cut and paste, really. Many-year winters. The constellation the Ice Wagon with its blue-eyed driver is very similar to the constellation the Ice Dragon with its blue eyes. Harrenhal rhymes with Harrenhal, Tessenia rhymes with Visenya, and John is a character, except he's Old John, and he's a storyteller like Old Nan. And Bitterblooms are like winter roses blooming in the wintertime. And there's wind wolves instead of dire wolves, and not starting a fire because of fear of being seen like in John and Corin's journey, and both vampires and others float on top of the snow. Now let's talk about these vampires. These of course aren't bloodsuckers. If anything, they're just giant running bats that live in the woods. Our author is pretty obsessed with bats. There's the whole Harrenhal thing and the swamp bats from Men of Greywater Station, and Dying of the Light features some bat-like banshees. And there's the Harangan slave race of the dactyloids. Right, in fact, I wonder if these vampires aren't actually dactyloids. I mean, this is an interregnum world filled with ruins, so there must have been some sort of battle on this planet. I'm not sure why they're not flying if they're dactyloids. I'm not sure why they're not flying, period. They're bats. So I think Melisandre is a lot like Morgan. Oh yeah, definitely. They're both eccentric and braggarts and use sexuality as power. No, I meant they were both magicians. More like charlatans. Melisandre bullshits and exaggerates and uses powders to make it look like she's doing magic. And charlatanism is a big theme of our author's work. This whole story is about Morgan pretending to have powers, but really using technology. We'll see this again in Call Him Moses and 7 Times Never Kill Man. Oh, you don't believe in magic in Ice and Fire? No, I don't. I think there's technology, telepathy, and telekinesis. You're silly. Of course there's magic. The winged knight can fly. So Sweetrobin, these gatherings are an interesting part of our story. Once again, our author is talking about genetics. Genetics? What do you mean? Well, just like the wildlings, these tribes are heavily inbred. But rather than stealing people, the tribes have gatherings in order to introduce new genes into their pools. If only the others had orgies, they wouldn't need to steal people. So Sweetrobin, this story has a lot of references to the larger Thousand Worlds universe. There's Stephen Cobalt Northstar, who started the Civil War. There's the explorers Celia Marsayan and Tomo and Wahlberg. There's Erica Storm Jones, the religious leader. Lemia Bayless is mentioned, who has a big part of Dying of the Light. And Clarinamas is mentioned, who has a huge part in The Glass Flower. I have no idea who Lilith is, or Deirdre Delaraine. And we hear about the other planets as well. Avalon, Bastion, Jameson's World, Ymir, Old Poseidon, High Cavalon. Avalon is the interesting one, as it's the subject of our author's aborted book. In King Arthur, Avalon is where Morgan Le Fay is from. It's an island haven. And in the Thousand Worlds, it's a world that has spared the Civil War and an interregnum. It's a haven of knowledge and technology, which makes me wonder what's on Westeros' Avalon, the Isle of Faces. Most certainly ancient knowledge. So Sweetrobin, is there any last things that you found interesting about the story? Well, I wanted to talk about the differences between Old John's stories and Tessenia's stories. Old John's stories were always about fighting, and wars, and vendettas, and monsters, chock-filled with blood and knives and impassioned oaths sworn by a father's corpse. Tysenia's stories, though, were quieter. There is a clear criticism of John's stories, but John's stories are essentially like Ice and Fire. What is the War of the Five Kings but a war of vendettas? Again, we find our author criticizing war, and our author links it to patriarchy. Well said, Sweetrobin. So let's wrap things up here. You, doing anything for Christmas? In Westeros, we have the Day of the Seven. It's very merry. Day of the Seven? I've never heard of that. What do you do on it? Well, we eat, and we give each other gifts, and we sing songs. Oh yeah? Like what? Oh, the crone gives me books, and the maiden gives me kisses. The warrior gives me knights, and the father grants my wishes. The mother bakes a lemon cake, and the smith fixes my toys when they break. Fa la la, la la la, merry 7th day. It sounds like you made that up, like, just now. I hate you, Preston. You're a bastard. I'm sorry, Sweetrobin. That was a great song. Have a very merry Day of the Seven. And for everyone else, Merry Christmas. I'll be off on vacation in Eritrea for the holidays. For the next book club, we'll be reading In the House of the Worm. It's another post-apocalyptic medieval tale. I've provided the text below, but I had trouble finding any audio for it, so I've read the first few pages of it as a preview. Anyway, check it out, and we'll see you guys in 2016.